Welcome, everybody. This is another stream sharing my thoughts and ideas about things to do with Daggerheart, creating Daggerheart-compatible material, and things like that. We are going to be talking about using and making travel-focused environments to use with Daggerheart. This is something that I've been picking at and experimenting with on my own in stuff that I'm developing to be published later on, and that people have seen some on the Patreon. But it seemed like a fun topic to talk through with people, continue to develop my ideas, hear what people are thinking, get a sense of what people's questions might be, right, where they have uncertainty, and see if we can figure out some options for kind of shedding light on the edges of the knowledge and ideas that people have about environments, to see if we can develop the design technology to better support that style of play, right? There are fantasy RPGs that are more focused on exploration, something like Forbidden Lands. There are games that are more focused on tactical combat, right? We might think of Draw Steel in that vein. Daggerheart, as written, has a few areas that it is designed to operate within. For me, travel and exploration is not necessarily the primary area that Daggerheart talks about being made for, but I think that there are cool tools for us to use toward that end, and so I want to see if we can push them a bit more. Thank you for the hats off to you, not a hag. Pathfinder PhD says, I've played around with environments doing some homebrew. Would travel scenes be a different thing altogether? I had to set up what would happen dependent on their role. Fine question. What I am going to probably mostly talk about is using traversal environments for scene and sequence scale traversal rather than moment by moment traversal, right? This will be the kind of travel that you see in something like the Lord of the Rings films by Peter Jackson, especially in the second film, The Two Towers, where we have the three characters who are chasing the characters that have been kidnapped. I know Lord of the Rings came out a long time ago, but there's new people born every day, so maybe some people don't want spoilers. I think there's a bunch of different ways of doing this. The way that I'm going to talk about is just one or a few of the options that are available. As often, we are going to be using some material with the community gaming license, right? I'm going to be doing some creation of new material. I'll probably be referring to the SRD in a couple of situations, going and looking at some of the environments that are in the SRD, right, from the core book. And we will go from there. So now I have made my disclaimers, and this can go away. Pathfinder PhD says, I also gave the PCs the option of traveling on the well-traversed path or traveling off the path to avoid patrols. Absolutely, right? You might say, all right, how are you going to try and get there? There's the well-trod road that will go faster, but you're going to be more likely to be noticed by like guard patrols from the kingdom. Or if you go off the path, it may take longer, or maybe you can find a shortcut. You're more likely to encounter XYZ types of challenges, but you will be able to avoid all of those patrols. So, if you have a countdown that is the group becomes wanted by the crown, then going on the road maybe is more likely to tick that countdown towards triggering, versus if you go in the woods. Because Daggerheart is so frequently very emergent and improvisation driven, even doing some targeted prep by like building a custom environment may not be able to cover all of the eventualities. What I'm hoping to do with these, especially the ones that are more general, is to provide some basic tools to suggest some options for how you might build environments that are focused on travel or longer term traversal, so that you have what you need to run a scene the way that you want to do it. As I was looking at some of the environments in a Kickstarter that's going on right now called Wondrous Environments, and thinking about the environments structures for this stream, I got to thinking of kind of two types of environments. And this is 100% just my way of thinking about it. And I may not hold to that way of thinking in, even 30 minutes. The idea there is that in the core rulebook, at least, and I'm seeing some of this in other stuff as well, there are some environments that are more generic and meant to be either the foundation of a custom environment that you build or to serve a particular type of role in any number of types of scenes. And then there are environments that maybe we see as a little bit more specific to an individual scene, or that feel more custom built for one type of scene in a more prescribed fashion. Here I'm thinking about the Burning Heart of the Woods environment that is in tier 3 in the core rulebook, right? This is not just haunted woods, it is Burning Heart of the Woods, and there are some specific descriptions that are given, and right, the flame is an indigo flame, right? Some of the details have been filled in so that this environment is less generic and more specific, right? It's already been built and designed toward some specificity and being evocative in particular ways. But you could also build a Cursed Woods environment, have a lot of the same features, but then you flavor them in a different way, right? You either position them in a more generic fashion so that people will bring their own flavor to it, or you try to make it more generic so that it is more flexible, right? It can be used in a number of different situations. Well, Haunted Woods can show up in a bunch of different places. A Burning Heart of the Woods with indigo flame and chaos magic and constructs of warped animals wreathed in indigo flame kind of turned into charcoal, right? Those are more specific. When you're building your environments, this can maybe be a useful way of thinking about what you're doing, right? Are you trying to build something that is more flexible and reflavorable later on? Or are you trying to build something either for a specific scene that you're going to be running or that you're designing for a scenario or a module? Do you want to go into specifics now to try to be evocative and to help tables that are using this environment have or feel like they already have more details to be able to build on and work with? Or are you trying to provide a little bit more of a skeletal structure and you're expecting the tables are going to bring something to it themselves? So if I was building an adventure module, and in that adventure there was a cross-country chase where the players had to chase some set of antagonists, across 100 miles. For that adventure, I would probably build that traversal environment more specifically. I might do traversal, I might do event. If movement and travel is still the focus, I might want to do traversal, but I think there's different ways of doing it. Building something for an individual adventure, I'm probably going to want to be more specific because I'm trying to serve that exact set of circumstances or an assumed middle in a range of interpretations and applications of this sequence within the adventure. Again, because improvisational play will move things in a bunch of different directions. I was running a game last night on SPG, and we started the session in the middle of a scene that had already done a lot of what I was hoping the scene would do, but the players were so bought in to the tensions and conflicts within the scene that continuing that scene took up much of a second session, right? It had been a little bit of one session and then most of another session, and it went in different directions than I was expecting, to greater degrees than I was expecting. But I still had my foundation of, here are the levers and buttons that I think are most useful for me when I am thinking about what I need from this scene. So that's a little bit of insight in terms of how I approach this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to here, and I'm going to move this around a little bit. Nope, I need this one. Here we go. So this is a custom environment that I have been working on. This is Perilous Journey. Oh, my camera is getting cut off. Let's fix that. So this is the Perilous Journey traversal environment that I have been developing. I think patrons have seen a version of this. For this, I am definitely inspired in part by the Perilous Wilds book that I'm going to find on itch.io and share in a link here for you. Oh, look, spam. Okay. So that was that taken care of. So Perilous Wilds, and this is the revised edition, is at lampblack-brimstone.itch.io, and then it's the Perilous Wilds revised edition. Perilous Wilds is a kind of collaborative world building and travel and exploration focused supplement that was meant mostly to be used with Dungeon World, but I think can be applied in a bunch of different situations. And one of the things in Perilous Wilds, in at least one version, was a custom move that is take a perilous journey or embark on a perilous journey. In Powered by the Apocalypse games, right? If you're familiar with this design style, people will design custom moves because the basic flow of play in most Powered by the Apocalypse games is that when a move is triggered, you pick up your 2d6, you add or subtract a trait, and then you look at the results that are 6 minus, right? 6 or below, bad result, 7 to 9, mixed result, 10 plus, very good result. And there's permutations from there. But the big thing from Perilous Journey that I wanted to take was the idea of building a set of tools for a more generic perilous journey, right? And so the description here is a dangerous trek across uncertain climes through a variety of threats. This is very specific. This is very generic rather than super specific. The impulses are exhaust resources, sap willpower, show the price of curiosity. And what I've tried to do for this is just to build a few options and tools for the kinds of moves that I would want to be able to make when I'm running a cross-country travel sequence in Daggerheart. I have used permutations of this in Witherwild games that I'm running, right? Because Fainwick during the Witherwild is an especially dangerous place to travel around in. And so having some of these moves to be able to utilize is pretty handy here. So what have we got? Begin with a single step as a passive. This is the close to standard, you are in a traversal environment, and so we're going to set a countdown to represent your attempts to move through this environment. So when the party sets out on a perilous journey, activate a progress countdown based on how long it will be to complete. So this is a little bit echoing the wording of the custom move from Perilous Wilds, right? A 4 count for a short journey, 6 for normal, 8 for long, 10 for very long. So you can set the size of the countdown based on the relative length / substance or size of the journey, right? If this is a perilous journey to the whole other side of the continent and you're abstracting it down to a set of roles using this environment, that's maybe a 10 count. Now, maybe you want to break that into smaller chunks. So you could do the first leg of this journey is across this region. And so we're going to do a perilous journey in this region. And then I have a couple of moves that are specific to the region. and then you do another perilous journey after the group has reached the edge of this initial region. All of these tools are flexible. The question is, what are you doing in your prep or your pre-work to set yourself up for success and ease of play in session? Right? You can improvise all of the things that an environment would give you without needing to build a stat block. Having a stat block gives you something to refer to. It gives you a menu of moves to draw from. It provides some easy reference in terms of some descriptions, the impulses as reminders of ways to act for/through the environment, suggestions on adversaries, things like that, right? It's a little bit concretized prep is one of the ways that I think about environments. So when the environment is introduced and after each completed roll to progress this countdown, describe where the PCs are in the journey and convey what challenges are present at this stage, right? So after each roll, as the GM, I'm going to describe the new situation, right? You made it through the inverted forest, and now you find yourself on the edge of the Obsidian Valley, right? And then I describe some of the Obsidian Valley, and I might say, the sharpness of all of the rocks in the Obsidian Valley mean that any normal rope you try to use to climb or descend has an incredibly high chance of being sheared and broken by the obsidian rocks that you're traversing, right? I suggest an obstacle or a danger, right? That obsidian cuts your ropes thing is more a danger. The obstacle would be you reach the edge of the Obsidian Valley and there is no path down. You can either go around the Obsidian Valley, which will add a tick to your countdown, right? It will extend the length of your journey. Or you can try to find a way to descend into the valley and progress. And if you do so, successes on those rolls will advance the countdown for this journey. The next action I have is bad weather. This is just, here's a move for the weather gets really bad. Text says, once per session, while the environment is active, introduce inclement weather that complicates the journey, right? Any type of weather. I could write versions of this that were 3 different actions, where one is heavy rain, the next is cutting wind, and then the third one is a tornado, right? And the tornado costs like 3 fear to activate, and it's super intense. This version is a little bit more of like a stem cell embryonic version of a move that you can then apply or manifest in a bunch of different ways. The core elements are, you're going to introduce weather. All PCs mark a stress or lose a hope. And if the party presses on, the next roll to progress the journey countdown is made with disadvantage. It sucks to get caught in bad weather, which is why you mark a stress or lose a hope. And if you try to keep going through bad weather, it is going to be harder to do, right? So the weather has to be substantial enough that it would interfere with your travel. And if the party tries to wait out the weather by taking a rest, the GM gains an additional 2 fear or can tick down a long-term countdown by 1, right? If you try to wait it out, some dangers will grow or villains' plans will advance while you're trying to wait out the weather. And so there's a disincentive to waiting and there's a disincentive to moving forward. The players are given a tough choice. Do you try to wait it out knowing that there's going to be some fear accumulation or a long-term countdown is going to tick? Or are you going to press on knowing that it's going to be harder to get through wherever you already are in this weather, right? If I add bad weather on top of some existing obstacle that I've already described, then it's not only do you need to get down into or trudge around the Obsidian Valley, it's also now pouring rain. And so all of these rocks are going to be even more slippery, and your vision is impaired. So trying to find a better way, like a better path to climb down, that's going to be harder because of the heavy rain. You figure out how the fiction informs the mechanics, how the mechanical elements in the environment can be reflected by or represented by the fiction. With each of these, we have our prompt questions, right? I'm using a template that has been posted a few times on the r/Daggerheart subreddit. Mark Song says, "Slippery Yeri," indeed, and welcome to the chat. So we've got our overall countdown. We've got a button we can push for bad weather, and we characterize that in a number of ways. Opportunists. Spend a fear to summon a group of adversaries equal to the default battle points budget for your party. This is a thing I have not done before, and I don't remember seeing it in official materials, right? Where you're just told, do the normal battle points thing. Other environments will say, spend a fear to introduce XYZ, or they'll say, have 2 of this, 1 of this, and then if the party is larger than 4, add 1 of those. I wanted to experiment with something that was more, hey, so do the thing that the battle point system says, right? It's going to be probably a bigger encounter with a number of adversaries across a few different types. Here I'm imagining a bandit group, a number of different beasts, things like that, right? If you're using Perilous Journey in the Witherwild, right, you might use some of the different adversaries that I have been building on streams, whether they're like a patron-only stream that I did, or some of the other ones, right? Okay, here's a ranged adversary, and here's a blade wolf, and then here's this weird bear thing, and that's my battle points budget, and that's going to represent the challenge here. I feel fine using the full battle point budget in this move because this environment is a larger scale environment, right? It represents an entire journey across the countryside by default, right? You can condense it for something else. But in a situation like that, it is very reasonable that the party would have this encounter and then probably take a short rest. There is also basically a kicker. If you have not played Magic the Gathering, that's where I first heard this term. The idea of a kicker is an additional cost you can pay on top of the normal cost for, in Magic, a spell or effect, where you can kick the effect up to higher gear, right? You can boost it, you can goose it, you can put in the Nas. You spend an additional fear to increase the battle point budget by 2, or force the PC with the highest instinct to make an instinct roll to sense the attackers as they approach. And on a failure, the PCs are caught unawares, and an adversary immediately takes the spotlight. If I wanted to be really mean, I could borrow from the ambusher, the ambushed environment, where if the player characters fail the instinct roll to notice the ambushers, the GM gains fear. I'm less inclined to do that here because this comes as a result of spending an extra fear when you're already spending a fear. And so if you did it right, you could spend a fear and then spend a second fear. They fail the roll, and then you get back those 2 fear. I'm less inclined to have something that costs fear and potentially gives fear. Other designers might choose to make a choice that will allow that, right? You spend fear and you can gain fear from that same move. There may be situations where it is a better or worse idea to do that. But what this does is it gives you some flexibility in how you're going to utilize the move, right? You can have the group come across a group of bandits that are probably going to be adversarial for whatever reason, or you come across like a mother bear and her cubs. And that's not necessarily adversarial, but it could become so. Or you know that you want to have an encounter, and so you spend a fear to build your group of adversaries, and then you spend another fear to project the threat of an ambush at the player characters, right? You give them that reaction roll. I didn't have it as a reaction roll. I think this should be a reaction roll. because it is a roll that is called for directly as the result of a move that I'm making as the GM. There are going to be some times when the move you call for, or the roll that you call for, should be an action roll. Here, I think it should probably be a reaction roll. And then the last feature I have in this Perilous journey, which is kind of like my prototypical travel-oriented environment, is dangerous feature. Right here, again, we're pretty generic. This is a reaction, though. When a PC fails a roll to advance the progress countdown for the journey, describe a physical hazard or mishap that deals them, and then this should be bold, I believe, in our style guide, deals them 1d10 plus 2 physical damage. You may also spend a fear. Here we have another kicker. I'm going to bold spend an additional fear to increase the countdown by 1. Tick up, not down, as you describe how the setback complicates the journey. Right? So you have, here's an immediate move that I can make in response to a failure. Right? This is not necessarily this can be the move you make in response to a failure with hope or a failure with fear, right? Or if it's a failure with fear, you might do dangerous feature and make a different move, because you're going to say, oh, okay, failing this roll had specific consequences. Here are those consequences. And because you failed with fear, here's something else. That's if you're going to be especially rough. But if you're spending a fear for the extra move, right, then you're having to spend the fear that you just got from it. So there's a little bit of a balancing question. Depending on your approach and depending on the scene, you might decide that you wouldn't want to necessarily do both of those in one situation, because you might feel like it's not appropriate, right? I might be much more likely to do this on a failure with fear than a failure with hope. On a failure with hope, I might just increase the countdown by 1 as I describe the way that the failure makes things harder. On a failure with fear, I'm more likely to go ahead and follow through with the damage. You could, of course, tweak this and use dangerous feature as a reaction on a success with fear, right? You progress, but you get hurt along the way. In that situation, I probably wouldn't want to spend a fear to increase the countdown, because then I would be more directly undermining the character's success. Even though I'm having to spend a resource to do it, it kind of becomes a tug of war where we end up feeling like nothing has changed, even if the fiction has changed. So my Perilous journey was already mostly in place. Talking through it, I found some places where I wanted to make a couple of tweaks. So that's a great result in terms of what I'm trying to do. And I hope that this speaks to the idea that it can be useful to just talk through and review, or almost like rubber duck, your Daggerheart-compatible material when you are homebrewing, or when you're prepping, or when you're designing things to be published, right? You're explaining it to yourself. Basically, I'm explaining it to the stream, which is the same as explaining it to myself. And then I identified places where I wanted to make tweaks. I have some other traversal environments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about another one of these. This is not into the nice formatting yet, because it comes from a different Word document, but this is a fairly robust traversal environment that I would probably also use for an extended sequence, right? It's not just, do you get across a football field of rolling sand dunes? Do you get across a region of burning sands? So this is a tier 2 traversal environment, a wide expanse of desert, dunes of sand dotted by cacti and scrubland, sprawling beyond the horizon and promising a desiccated doom to any that enter. Right, so I've got some flavor there. I have a couple of descriptive details: cacti, scrubland. I'm suggesting scope, right? This sprawls beyond the horizon. It is a big enough environment that you can't see the end of it before the planetary horizon. And we've got some vibes. Impulses, consume water, exhaust travelers, tempt folly with mirages. And there'll be more on that in the features that I read up. This is a difficulty 14, which is kind of average for a tier 2 environment, right? I think going through a desert with the bad weather that comes with the desert, right? Heat and then the cold justifies at least an average difficulty here. And then there's a bunch of potential adversaries, right? Giant Eagle, Glass Snake, Mortal Hunter, Merchant Baron, Spectral Archers, Spectral other things, right? There's ghosts of people who died here. You might come across a Merchant Baron who's trying to take a caravan across the sand. A Mortal Hunter is like a leader of undead type adversaries. And then here's a couple of beasts that you might run into. So it's just a wide smattering. Again, because this is a traversal type environment, we have this Rolling Dunes passive with some description. Travel across the desert is disorienting and exhausting. Set a progress countdown 8, representing the journey. And then you're given some guidance on how to run this environment. Characters might roll Instinct for navigation, Knowledge to recall a route or analyze a map, Presence to keep up the spirits of the traveling party, Strength to pull a cart, etc. This is signaling to the GM that this progress countdown can be addressed in a bunch of different ways. It's not just, okay, make an instinct roll to navigate. Make another instinct roll to navigate. If the whole sequence only calls for one type of roll, that's probably going to be less engaging for a lot of groups, because common wisdom is going to be, okay, who has the best instinct? They should just make all of the rolls. Instead here, the feature is explicitly making room for people to approach this challenge and to think more laterally, so that the Seraph with a high strength and a low instinct can make a contribution, instead of feeling like they need to kind of be a passenger in the scene, or that they're only going to be able to be in the back seat of the scene. You know, maybe they'll help with a group action, or they'll spend one of their prayer dice to give somebody hope or reduce some damage. Having that flexibility presents a challenge like this in a way that I hope for many tables will feel more approachable by any number of player characters in the group, rather than being like, okay, this is a thing just for the ranger or the sorcerer, right? The druid and the sorcerer are going to be probably the ones that have the highest instinct, because that's the spellcast trait in the core book subclasses. Instead here, we have some options. Our prompts: what landmarks let the party know they've gone in circles? What carrion eaters watch the party as they languish? What insight might they gain from local animals, right? A druid or ranger character, or anybody with the sage domain, is going to have... Sorry, let me move this over so that you can see all of it. Anybody with the sage domain is going to have access to nature's tongue, which will let them speak with plants and animals. So the prompt here kind of gestures toward that, and maybe inspires or encourages the GM to consider what information they might be able to glean by using nature's tongue. No place to hide here is a passive. The punishing sun makes taking downtime during the day impossible unless the PCs find meaningful cover from the heat, right? You are just under the burning sun and you're going to take a break. That's not really going to do a lot for you, as suggested by this feature. So that says you can't take downtime during the day, so you're going to have to keep pushing on. You can take downtime at night, right? It's not, you cannot take downtime at all. What I don't have here is I don't have a separate feature that is, it's really cold at night. I could absolutely add that, especially in the type of desert that has that really huge swing. Maybe this desert doesn't have it, or maybe we're imagining or guessing that the player characters are better prepared for cold weather than they are for hot weather. Because at a certain point, you can't take off more clothes. Or even if you have clothes that are kind of protective against wind, or they breathe a lot, and so they're not especially hot. We could certainly add a feature that talks about the cold at night, right? That if they travel at night without a heat source, then there's probably going to be something that would like make them mark stress because of the cold. I have a mirage as one of the primary actions here, right? You spend a fear to create a mirage on the horizon. Each PC must make an instinct reaction roll to identify the mirage as a fake. On a failure, a PC can take a hope if they insist the mirage is real and add one to the progress countdown as they take the group off course to confirm. This puts that choice in the player's hands, saying, hey, you are going to be rewarded individually if you play into this mirage, even though you, the player, know that it is a mirage. It will make problems for the group. So this is also something that the players might talk about at the player level of, hey, is it okay if I go off chasing this mirage? I think it's what my character would do. I know it's going to make things harder for us. And that will let you get the type of scene that I'm familiar with in this type of travel sequences, when someone sees a mirage and they are convinced that it's real and they drag everybody with them to go and find it, and then they see that it's not real. The incentivization here, right, is you get to take a hope if you believe in it. I could easily see a version that is a little bit different, where if you get to the mirage and then obviously it's not there, everybody loses hope, or there's some way that you're forced to lose hope, or maybe you have to make a reaction roll or lose hope. That's a different way of applying the same kind of idea. I wouldn't say that one is necessarily automatically better or worse than another. Here is the almost obligatory sandstorm, right? This is spend 2 fear. Call for a group action with the leader probably rolling instinct. Probably, but not automatically, right? To represent the group finding cover. On a failure, each PC marks 1d4 plus 1 stress. That can be a lot of stress, right? At tier 2, you're probably not going to have more than 7 or 8 stress slots. On each success, each PC marks 1 stress. And once the sandstorm clears, the next roll to traverse the desert is made with disadvantage due to the changed landscape. So what I don't have here is how long does the storm last. I have a group action to try to get to cover before the storm hits. If you fail, it applies stress, and then that kind of indicates that it's moving on. You could easily change a sandstorm to be it deals damage, right? The kind of high-speed sand tearing at you like sandpaper. There's a version where you could have this be stress and damage, or it's just damage. If it's some kind of magic sandstorm, right, then you figure out what that magical effect is. If it's the kind of storm that lasts longer, then you'd probably want to change the type of feature that you're utilizing here, because this is really a one and done effect, right? You might change it to a progress countdown within a progress countdown, right? I'm less inclined to do that because that's stacked clocks. You have to finish this clock before you can get back to that clock. But what if you do something that would progress both clocks? It gets a little tricky. You'll notice that I say clocks there because in a lot of other TTRPGs, this type of mechanic is expressed as a clock. In other games, it's expressed as a track. It's countdowns in Daggerheart. And we're suggesting here with the sandstorm that the landscape is changing as a result of the sandstorm, which leads right into my next feature, shifting sands. As a reaction after a sandstorm or downtime, reveals something that has been buried by the sand but is now accessible. And with the prompts, I'm giving some suggestions. Do they find the ruins of a settlement that could serve as shelter? Do they find a wrecked merchant caravan with goods intact, wondering what happened to the merchants, right? This is a way you can incentivize player characters to kind of take a side track, right, to basically do a side quest. Oh, hey, here's something interesting. It's not in the direction that you're trying to go, but an opportunity has presented itself. And then we have a straight up positive feature, right? As a reaction, if a PC rolls at least a 19 or higher, let's do at least a 19 or a critical on a roll to navigate within the environment, they locate an oasis. Each PC immediately gains hope. Let's do each is fine, right? It's each or every. Additionally, while in the oasis, the PCs may take downtime during the day despite the no place to hide feature, right? Because they found a safe place to rest. And then we've got our prompts here. I could add to this by having there be like loot in the oasis, but ultimately the reward on a really good roll is you get that oasis, you gain a hope, and you have the opportunity to take downtime when normally you wouldn't be able to. And then I have another reaction that connects more to some of this other stuff about like not taking downtime during the day. Right? Punishing heat. When a PC makes a roll to traverse the environment during the day, they must make a strength reaction roll or mark a stress and lose a hope. Right? So a lot of this environment is marking stress and losing hope. And I think features that have those types of effects are really useful to consider for your travel-focused environments that are supposed to take a toll on the characters or are supposed to be disheartening, right? If you're trying to travel through a blizzard, right, you might lose hope as you're going. If we think about Lord of the Rings as an example, and we look at the Fellowship trying to go over Caradhras, right? My pronunciation of Elven and Dwarvish is not perfect. I apologize mostly to Greg Wilson. Hi, Greg. Greg is a big Lord of the Rings fan. When they're trying to go over the mountain, right, Gandalf is leading them. There's this great bit where Legolas is just walking on top of the 3 foot high snow because he's an elf and they're magical. They're pushing on. They're trying to get over the mountain, and Saruman is just blasting them with the blizzard, right? And the difficulty of traveling in that snow, in that intense weather, we can absolutely read that in terms of the player characters are losing the hope resource. And without the hope resource, they can't utilize experiences, they can't use some of these other abilities, and some of the if you don't have a hope, something else happens features would then hit them even harder, right? There are some features that are target PC loses a hope. If they are not able to lose a hope, then they mark stress or mark HP or something like that. We could add that to the punishing heat. Because they're already marking a stress, I'm less inclined because this feature on a failure has a resource cost of 2, a stress and a hope, which is already pretty big. And there's no limitation to it. Every time they make a roll, you're calling for a reaction roll. So they can keep succeeding the reaction roll, but in a party of 4 or 5 PCs, there's a pretty good chance that one or another of the PCs is going to have a lower strength. In the fiction, who is that punishing heat going to impact the most? It's probably the characters with the lower strength, because in this game, strength also sort of, and in some ways represents your endurance, right? A game like D&D or Pathfinder or a lot of the traditional 6-stat games that are more close to D&D will have a constitution stat. In those games, this would be a constitution save check or something like that. In Daggerheart, that's kind of more folded into strength. And so that's why we're calling for strength here. If I wanted to get more granular, I could say that characters wearing armor that gives an evasion penalty take disadvantage on this reaction roll, under the idea that the types of armor that give evasion penalties are the heavier armors. I don't know that I want to get that specific. I'm leaving this feature a little bit more streamlined. Nothing says that an individual GM couldn't make that ruling in the moment, because again, this is a rulings not rules game, and we try to begin and end with the fiction. So there may be some situations where the GM says, no, I cannot imagine that this character with all of their armor and all that they're carrying doesn't have something of a harder time with this, even though they have a pretty good strength roll, right? Their strength trait lets them succeed, but then there's other environmental factors. So that's why we have that. I've left it a little bit more streamlined. I'm happy. I'm comfortable with that. I can improvise in the moment if I feel like I need to. So how are we feeling about this approach? I can step back a little bit and talk some more about philosophy of using environments for travel scenes. We can look at another travel/traversal oriented environment that I have to take some lessons and examples from it. If you have a travel sequence that you are getting ready for as a GM, or that you're trying to develop for some Daggerheart-compatible thing, and you want to brainstorm it with me, if you're here live, that's great. If you are watching this on the VOD later on, I would invite you to ask your question in the comments on the YouTube VOD rather than trying to connect through Twitch, because YouTube is where I'm mostly focusing my archive video on demand, like social strategy kinds of a thing. So there is that. It may still be that some folks find they would rather use tools or the systems from other games for really detailed and granular travel in Daggerheart, or use those games for a campaign that was really travel focused. I'm not going to say that you shouldn't do it, but speaking from my experience with Daggerheart and what I have been doing for games that have travel as a bigger element, I wanted to share some of these experiences and ideas, right? I'm running 2 tables playing the Witherwild, and for both of those groups, I have tried to emphasize the fact that just moving around the region, especially of Fanewick, is dangerous, and then moving around within Haven is dangerous in a different way, because Haven is an imperial power who I am largely depicting as very much oriented toward wanting to know what everybody is doing. And so a group of roaming adventurers might run afoul of like the Havenite military, because they are, their do-gooding maybe is at odds at times with what the Haven leadership is interested in doing. And so if I have groups running around in the Witherwild, if all I give them is a straightforward progress countdown, and I don't have some of these other tools, I don't have other encounters ready, I don't have great visual aids, right? There's a bunch of different ways that I can make a travel sequence feel more exciting by giving specifics, by having some variety, by having kind of dynamism across the travel sequence. So it's not just like, okay, great, day 3, make the same roll again. Presenting a challenge as you must make the same roll again and again and again and again can be challenging if the way that you are implementing that is taxing, and so then the player characters are become focused on resource management, right? Stress and hope and armor slots or whatever. I remember a sequence in Critical Role's Divergence miniseries that Brennan Lee Mulligan ran. He had a sequence that was the player characters have almost no resources, and they are trying to traverse like a hot, dry area is what I remember. And so they were just having to make these like survival checks and constitution rolls and taking levels of exhaustion, right? And the people get pulled on somebody else's back and they keep doing the same thing. Brennan made that work by emphasizing the cost, describing the intensity of the environment around them, and through the kind of addition of meaning through repetition. If I were trying to do that same thing in Daggerheart, I would probably want to use things like the punishing heat reaction, or have some other moves that I can make over the course of play to give contour and variation across the sequence, or make space for characters to have those tough conversations with each other about, like, insert name of person is not going to make it 2 more days unless we get water, or, you know, we are able to find a way out of this, right? People making decisions about, do you leave somebody behind? Does somebody go out scouting on their own while another group tries to find water or shelter, right? I want to have tools to prepare me to and support me when I am deciding which moves to make to dramatize a travel sequence toward what I am hoping to get from the scene, right? To set up interpersonal moments between player characters or between characters and NPCs and things like that. And for the way that I run games, specifically Daggerheart, I'm going to want to have some of those tools, because for me, the approach of we're going to make the same roll again and again, and we're going to have that kind of accumulation approach. In this example, this was D&D 5e. I've not GM'd or DM'd 5e as much. I have spent my focus elsewhere. So there's a bunch of different ways of approaching it. This was an attempt to try to drill down on a more specific subtopic when talking about designing for, you know, your own home game of Daggerheart, doing homebrew, or building Daggerheart-compatible material to publish. I got to show off some stuff that I'm working on, which is really fun. There is right now a Kickstarter for something called Wondrous Environments that is a crowdfunding project focused on environments, surprisingly. So as of today, September 10th, it has 21 days to go, and there is a preview PDF you can take a look at and decide if that's something that is appealing to you. They have reached their initial goal and then starting to work on some stretch goals. If you didn't see, this same week and yesterday, as of recording, Darrington Press released 16 adversaries, I think, and 4 new environments for the Void. I did not look at those here because, to my understanding of the CGL, Void material is not public game content, and so it's not eligible to be shown or streamed under the kind of clauses and versions of the CGL that I use for doing these streams. I know that other people have done stuff talking about them. That's between them, their lawyers, and whatever else, right? I'm not a lawyer. I'm just trying to do my stuff, be as best a model as I can, and not make trouble for anybody. But this does remind me, and working on this reminded me, that I really like environments. I already knew that I liked environments, but this kind of gave me even more extra energy. So I am working on it'll probably be an environments focused book, right? I have sketched out a plan to have the book include like 30 something environments, and I've written 25 or so of them, right? I'm pretty far along the way, and I need to write a few more higher tier environments. And with the higher tier environments, what I'm finding is that I'm more likely to want to get really specific, but I have a few at higher tiers that I think will be kind of flexible because they hit some major epic fantasy genre tropes in the way that the Divine Usurpation event environment in the core book kind of covers a common or not uncommon epic fantasy trope, right? If we look at just heroic fantasy actual plays, right, there's been Divine Usurpation kind of stuff in NADPOD and in Critical Role. And let's see, I don't remember if there was a Divine Usurpation in a 5e game for the Adventure Zone, but there's probably others elsewhere. So it has that usefulness there, and I'm going to keep on working on environments. So thank you to everybody who tuned in live, And thank you to everyone who is watching on the VOD later on. So for folks who are here now, thank you to Mark Songs, to Pathfinder PhD, and to everybody else who jumped in on the stream as we were going. You can find more stuff that I have made that is Daggerheart compatible and or talking about Daggerheart over on my Patreon at patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood. Thanks for being here, Phoebus. That Patreon is where people will get the first chance to see Daggerheart compatible material that I'm working on. I am getting close to being done with Bastion of Hope, which is a revolutionary epic fantasy campaign frame that I started working on some time ago and have been adapting to be a Daggerheart compatible campaign frame. Right now, I'm guessing that the environments book is probably going to be the second thing that I publish because I've made a lot of progress on that. And because of time that I've spent working on the game, I feel like I can make environments with greater confidence and with needing less playtesting than stuff like the new classes that I built. Just kind of how I experience things and my thoughts about it. I'm also getting to use these environments in the games that I'm running, and it's much trickier to playtest new classes with the VTT options that are available. I am going to investigate the Foundry-born Foundry client API, however we talk about it, more, but I'm just not especially familiar with Foundry as a baseline, and so that's increased the activation energy needed for me to go and take a look at that. That I think is promising because it may be easier to add custom classes based on the way that I think Foundry operates, but that is a guess. If you are more familiar with Foundry and you have experience with or thoughts on what it would take to add custom classes to be able to do online playtesting through Foundryborn, I would love to hear from you. Please drop a comment over on the YouTube. With all that said, thanks to everybody again for watching, and I will be back on Friday with the Sharing Spotlight stream talking about Apocalypse Keys, a kind of urban fantasy / investigation, paranormal investigation RPG designed by Ray Najati, published by Evil Hat Productions. A game that I have played some, really like, and have some thoughts about that I would love to share and encourage folks to check it out. So until then, thank you all and take care.